Cute. Uh, yeah, Patrick and I have been talking about getting a dog again. We haven't had a dog for a number of years, but there's a side of us too that recognizes it's a big commitment. So I don't know. What were you saying, Paymane? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
I said I remember your chow chow. That was
Yeah.
one big commitment of a dog.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, we miss her still, but she's been gone now for 6 years. Hard to believe. So,
Wow.
yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and get started again. So as I said, we're entering into another section of the text. This section is where we're going to be looking at kind of invoking Yamantaka, which again is kind of symbolic of this energy of cutting through all of our crazy deluded minds, especially the mind of self-cherishing and self-grasping for that matter, and helping us to overcome that. So let's go to the outline first, just so I can get you grounded in that. Remember again that we had those few little corrections to the outline that was distributed earlier. 1 through 8 is the first part. Then we went through verse 9, which had to do with Tonglen. Then we just finished 10 through 48, karmic cause and effect and their antidotes. So we have one little verse that kind of takes us into that direction, the final, this verse 49, that has to do with recognizing the enemy of self-cherishing. And then we're going to go on to a large section again, about another 40 verses, 41 verses from 50 through 90. That, as I said, is requesting Yamantaka to remove self-cherishing and self-grasping. And it's another one of these sections that for a good part of it has a refrain that repeats from verse to verse. And then you just change the first two lines in this case to be dealing with some of the various things that are a part of that we want Yamantaka to remove. In other words, we're kind of invoking our own innate wisdom and the wisdom that we can develop to overcome all of that through, as well as our compassion and our desire to benefit others and so on, bodhicitta. So let's go into verse 49 and take a look at that verse first. Let me scroll up here, then we'll read this, go through this together. So 49, this being the case, we seize the enemy. We seize the thief who deceived us through lying in ambush. We seize the impostor who disguised himself as us. Ah, all the doubt about it being self-cherishing has been cut. So this is kind of saying, okay, we've figured out based on all these verses that showed us all the ways that we suffer due to self-cherishing and of course self-grasping as an underlying root of that. Um, we've identified the thief. We identify the enemy. We know who the enemy is. So this verse is kind of the setup again for then the invoking of Yamantaka to help us to annihilate that, to help us to get rid of that. So previously, Geshe-la says, in the verses above, the faults of self-cherishing were said to be many, since all of these faults have definitely been seen to be neither an exaggeration or a deprecation. They don't exaggerate things. They don't in some way diminish it. They are the actual faults that we experience. This verse says, this being the case, this being the case that we have understood these faults of self-cherishing. The enemy, self-cherishing, has until now not been recognized as the enemy. This is the key thing, is we've been following the mind of self-cherishing since beginningless time and not seeing it as an enemy. Rather, it seems to be our dear friend that's watching out for us, right? So now, however, he says, by means of the Dharma and the compassion of the Lama, we have recognized the enemy as the enemy. We have recognized it to be the worst of thieves who steals the wealth of our virtue. In that, just as having been ambushed by bandits, our wealth is stolen, having been invisibly ambushed by this enemy, we have been deceived. We have ended up losing our sources of happiness and not gaining a single one. The mind of self-cherishing, again, has been responsible for so much suffering and never responsible for any real happiness, because it is together, as I pointed out, with non-virtuous states and causing us frequently to engage in non-virtuous actions of body and speech. So, disguising itself as ourselves, it has been very difficult to recognize. It kind of seems to be who's tending out or watching out for us, tending to our welfare. Yeah, we have that idea of the self-cherishing mind being part and parcel of who we are, and it's in our acting in our best interest, but it's not. It's deceived itself, or it's deceived us by disguising itself to be part of our own best interest. And again, as I pointed out in the motivation tonight, it's not achieving your best interest. If you want to have your selfish needs met, you actually have to be more wise about it. You have to actually overcome the mind of self-cherishing and adopt the mind that cherishes others. So it has deceived us by pretending to be beneficial through cherishing us. It acted as if it was us. So this is the nature of this mind of self-cherishing. It's been sort of deceitful. It's pretended to be acting in our best interest, but it's only created more harm. Until recently, let me scroll up a little bit here. Until recently, without understanding it to be like that, we have mistaken it to be a definite benefactor, whereupon we have come under its power. Now, however, we have recognized it to be an impostor who has disguised itself as us. So it's not to say that it's um, that there is sort of a real you that it's disguising it as. It's just the general sense of self that we have. It's disguising itself as being acting in the interest of that, kind of being our best friend, being, again, as it was said there, a benefactor, kind of watching out for our well-being. And again, we know this mind plays that role because we've seen it ourselves. And of course, we can also see it in the world around us, how beings succumb to that mind and think that if you don't watch out for number one, you can't watch out for yourself, well, then nobody's going to watch out for you. So you then play that role and follow that mind of self-cherishing that is pretending to be in your best interest, but it takes you down the wrong path. Again, as we've seen through all of these various sufferings that ensue. So here I did want to share in regard to verse 49, which again is this recognition of the enemy of self-cherishing, a little bit from Tupten Chodron's Good Karma. And this is about the two things that were mentioned that have opened our eyes to this reality, which are the three jewels and our lamas. And here specifically it's pointing to the Buddha, but of course from the Buddha comes the Dharma, and then those who realize the Dharma become the Sangha and so on. But it's essentially due to the three jewels and our gurus that we are able to see the truth. As it says here, due to their kindness, we have seen the truth. For countless lifetimes, we have been wandering in psychic existence, following whatever impulsive thought came into our mind, unable to discern wholesome from unwholesome thoughts and actions. We just keep doing things and we don't even recognize that we're creating our own problems, following the mind of self-cherishing, and of course also being under the control of the mind of self-grasping. But it's primarily self-cherishing, again, that we're targeting in this first part of the text, where again we're looking at how do we move in the opposite direction of cherishing others and developing bodhicitta. It is only because we have met a spiritual mentor that has kindly opened our eyes to the Buddha's teachings that we have been able to correctly identify the source of all our pain and misery. That's actually coming from within ourselves. It's not something outside of ourselves that is the problem. It is our own mind of self-cherishing that has deceived us, led us astray. While many people have been kind to us, she says, during our lives, our parents, teachers, friends, healthcare professionals, and so on, none of them have been able to lead us out of psychic existence, unless your parent, was a Buddhist teacher who was teaching you that, or unless your teacher is a spiritual teacher. But nonetheless, when we look at our ordinary mundane affairs, most of the people involved in our lives have been very kind, but they've never, taught you how to get out of samsara, how to be liberated from psychic existence. The kindness shown to us by our spiritual mentors and the three jewels is peerless, for they lead us on the way to actual joy and freedom. Seeing this, our hearts fill with gratitude. So I just shared that passage because she's really, highlighting this idea, which was just mentioned in passing to some degree in our commentary. But it's really due to the kindness of those who turned our minds towards the Dharma, opened our eye of Dharma, that we actually are able to move in a direction that will be beneficial because we see things more clearly. We know that these are problematic states of mind. Of course, we still have to do the work, and just seeing it is not enough. We have to actually comply with that wisdom, that knowledge that we've gained. And then she adds this kind of nice little comment. It's for this reason that we sometimes see our own teachers pause and even wipe their eyes while teaching, kind of with some tears. They are remembering the kindness of their teachers in the three jewels. I've seen this certainly with His Holiness, pause sometimes and weep, but it shows. And I think we've all had that moment where we've been very grateful to someone on our spiritual path who has helped us. His Holiness the Dalai Lama certainly has helped so many beings. Lama Zopa Rinpoche is another one, and so many other gurus. But when we remember their kindness and the kindness of the Buddha, the kindness of all those beings of the past, we can, really feel an incredible debt of gratitude to them for what they have done in helping us on our path. So now we go again into the section of 50 through 90. As was pointed out earlier on the outline, this is called requesting Yamantaka, to remove self-cherishing and self-grasping. So again, self-cherishing is the main one that we've been targeting here, but while he's at it, let's get rid of both of them. They are the twin demons. And as I said, they arise together with most of our problematic states of mind until we've done some deeper work to remove self-grasping. And of course, you can also remove self-cherishing to some degree through practicing cherishing others. But nonetheless, these two thoughts are both part of the problem in the Lojong training. And therefore, we again have to generate conventional bodhicitta as well as ultimate bodhicitta. So let's go on to the beginning of this, verse 50. We start getting these more kind of, we had the wheel of sharp weapons, which was violent enough, but now we even have these kind of more wrathful kind of things appearing, because remember, Yamantaka is kind of a bad dude. So now spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead, furiously spin them 3 times overhead. Spread your legs, the two truths, open wide your eyes, method and wisdom, bearing the fangs of the 4 powers, pierce the enemy. So this is where the 4 powers are mentioned. So let's go through Geshe-Jampa Gyatso's commentary, which actually breaks this down into individual lines, and then I will come back to the slides as we go through this. So in his commentary, which is on page 20 now. Oh, maybe I forgot to read the rest of this. I did. Yeah, there was some more continued commentary on that previous verse. In other words, until now, most of us have not fully understood it to be the enemy. And even though some have understood this slightly, they still have very many doubts that have not been cut regarding whether or not it is an enemy. Now, however, due to having decisively recognized it, we see the Dharma and the Guru as marvelous, or again, the 3 jewels and the Guru as marvelous. And we say, since we have now determined the main enemy to be just that, all doubt regarding it being or not being the enemy has been cut. So again, that's pointing out what we saw in that previous verse, right, where it says at the end, all the doubt about it being self-cherishing has been cut. All right, so sorry I missed that before. Now on to verse 50, which, as I said, he splits out into individual lines. So the first one, now spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead. By means of such reasons, everything that we've looked at, all of we've come to identify as the real enemy, we're invoking Yamantaka to spin the sharp weapons of negative actions overhead. It's kind of interesting. He took actions and he made it into negative actions. I'm going to show you how Venerable Thupten Chodron actually describes this a little bit differently. But nonetheless, there is one way that we could interpret this as our negative action. It's like we're almost going to take all those negative actions that we've seen that have ripened into this sort of sharp weapon, and we're going to use it to cut itself now, to kind of cut the source of all of that. It's, again, one way that we could interpret it that way. My teacher, Geshe-Jampa Gyatso, he didn't really talk so much about what it means to say the sharp weapons of negative actions. But I'll show you in a moment how Venerable Thupten Chodron actually calls these the more virtuous actions we can engage in. So this is an exhortation to the great wrathful one Yamantaka that says, destroy the enemy, self-cherishing, into nothingness, into oblivion. So again, Yamantaka, recall that Yamantaka had two different meanings. We had the definitive meaning, which is the union of bliss and emptiness. That's the tantric element of what that really is referring to. And then we have the interpretive, what needs to be interpreted as that, which is the form of Yamantaka that is on these screens, the shots that I have, this being that is practiced in highest yoga tantra, that is this embodiment of Manjushri. So we're kind of invoking that, but don't think that this is something outside of ourselves that's going to come in and do the work for us. This is invoking our own ability to accomplish that through the conventional bodhicitta and the ultimate bodhicitta being factors that we need to bring to bear to overcome these two states of mind, self-cherishing and self-grasping. So let me show you how Venerable Thupten Chodron talks about this. She says in Good Karma, raise the weapon of action refers to the four actions of pacification, pacifying negativities, increase, which is increasing our merit, our positive potential, control, which is influencing others to guide them on the correct path, and then wrathful activities, which are where we forcefully destroy hindrances. So these are the four that are spoken of. There's often presentations around Tantra engaging in pacification, increase, control, and wrathful activities. But these can be seen as the four ways that we can advance our spiritual practice. So she's saying that this verse, this line, is requesting Yamantaka to employ whichever of these methods will be most effective to lead us on the path. Either pacify our negativities, increase our merit, control us so that we get on the correct path, or wrathfully destroy these hindrances, which again would make some sense with regard to Yamantaka being that wrathful being. But nonetheless, this is how the Buddhas help others. This is how we should desire to help others, is to pacify, increase, control, and engage in whatever actions that might be wrathful to help them to destroy these factors. So then let's go to the next line where we look at this idea of spinning it 3 times. We saw that earlier. Force furiously, spin them 3 times overhead, spin these sharp weapons overhead. So Geshe-la says in his commentary, out of fury at that final object of wrath, Yamantaka spins the sharp weapons, his implements, 3 times overhead in order to symbolize demolishing the enemy with the 3, the 2 types of mind of enlightenment, which is conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, and their unification. So we've talked mostly about the 2 of them, but they need to eventually be unified. This is, again, we're going to study them separately, and in the sutra path, you practice them somewhat separately, but in the tantric path, you actually unify the 2. And this is what tantric practice of deity yoga is about, is that you not only work with the conventional appearance of yourself in the enlightened form and kind of work with your conventional truth, but you also do that within the sphere of emptiness so that you maintain an awareness of emptiness within the conventional appearance. And that's the unification that you model until you achieve the actual resultant state of Buddhahood, where those 2 are unified in the most complete way. So this is how that is spelled out in regard to my little presentation on PowerPoint. I found a little statue of Yamantaka, which has him wielding some weapons there of some sort. But anyway, spinning them 3 times over our head to kind of like cut all these things is conventional bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, and then again, a union of the 2. So kind of requesting this energy, which is once more our development of those states of mind. We're not, again, it's not some external thing that we're invoking to do this work for us. It's to supplant our mind of self-cherishing with conventional bodhicitta, which is the apex of our cherishing others, to get rid of our self-grasping with ultimate bodhicitta, which is the apex of our wisdom that knows how things actually exist, and then to, again, unite those 2. Okay, so now we go back to the slides for the not the slides, the text for the 3rd line. There, the text by Dhammarakshita says, spread your legs, the 2 truths, kind of make them kind of very solid in the ground, and then open wide your eyes, method and wisdom. So due to symbolizing the conventional mind of enlightenment, his right leg is bent, and due to symbolizing the ultimate mind of enlightenment, his left leg is extended. This is actually also indicative with Yamantaka. Yamantaka is a father tantra being, and so the right leg would always be bent. In the mother tantra, the left leg is bent and the right is extended out. But anyway, I don't know that there's any other real clue to what they have to do with conventional versus ultimate. But nonetheless, this is one leg showing that the Yamantaka is firmly grounded in conventional bodhicitta, and the other showing firmly grounded in ultimate bodhicitta. Whereupon his legs are spread apart. If your legs are further spread apart, you're more stable, right? Whereas if your legs are held very close together, you could, topple over somewhat more easily. So you've got the stability of those two minds. Likewise, in order to symbolize the need for equal parts of the two, method, which is conventional bodhicitta again, and wisdom, which is ultimate bodhicitta, though we often include more in method than just conventional bodhicitta. We include all the varieties of activities that are done supported by that mind, the other perfections, other than the perfection of wisdom, all the other activities of a bodhisattva. So again, the idea is that the two eyes represent method and wisdom, and they are both open equally wide. That they have an openness to either of them, showing that one is completely engaged in both parts of the path, method and wisdom. So maybe I don't need to necessarily keep going back and forth, but nonetheless, maybe for this part, I'll do that. And I'm not sure I'll do that for any future parts, but with the two legs spread wide, again, this represents the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth, that are, again, conventional bodhicitta would be grounded in conventional truth, ultimate bodhicitta in ultimate truth. These two truths that are, again, the foundation, the base of all of our practice. And then secondly, the two eyes wide open, which again, I showed a bit of a painting of Yamantaka that shows how wide open his eyes are. Of course, these are some of the other faces that are behind there. Then they all have those wide open eyes. Shows method and wisdom. And we haven't yet gotten to the last line, but that's where we have the four fangs that are the four opponent powers, which you might recall. So you see the four fangs, you've got the two on either side that are sticking out of the side on the top, and then the two that are on the ends of the other teeth. Those four fangs represent the four opponent powers, which, as we saw earlier, regret, reliance, remedy, and resolve. That's again the way that we are able to purify our own negativities, is through unleashing those four fangs on whatever negative karma we've created. All right. So let's look at the commentary from Geshe-la on that last part of this verse. Bearing the fangs of the four powers, pierce the enemy. Through bearing the four fangs that symbolize the four powers, pierce the self-cherishing, the enemy itself. Again, because all of our negative karma is created with some level of self-cherishing, we can say that using these four opponent powers to pierce it is completely appropriate, right? Because that's how we also remove and annihilate the negative karma that we've created. All right, so it's just invoking all of this kind of energy of this Yamantaka, again, which is symbolic of our own internal qualities we can develop, that we want to go after the enemy of self-cherishing and also the enemy of self-grasping that is its twin. Okay, so now we go into the next verse, and let's just stay with the commentary for now. This one actually has 5 lines in it in the presentation that we have. O king of the knowledge mantras that torment the enemy. I think it does. Yeah, I think this is the one that, O king of the knowledge mantras that torment the enemy. So just as there are many knowledge mantras that torment enemies through the rituals of mantra, you can develop these skills through reciting knowledge mantras, apparently, that allow you to torment enemies, to go after enemies. Of course, you don't do it with a malicious mind. Hopefully you do it with a mind that wants to tame them. To cherish others through neglecting ourselves is the king of the knowledge mantras that destroys the enemy self-cherishing. So they're using that again as an example and saying that the king of the knowledge mantras is the mind that cherishes others, which is the seed of our bodhicitta, which torments the enemy of self-cherishing, of course, that has been tormenting us. And by torment, there's nothing malevolent about it. We're trying to get rid of it. We want to get rid of it. We want to annihilate that demon, that Mara of self-cherishing that we saw earlier. So what is it that is tormented by the knowledge mantras? The cruel one called the insidious demon of self-grasping, that Mara, which again, self-grasping is used here, but we're going to see it also implies self-cherishing being there, runs uncontrollably in the jungle of psychic existence. This harkens back to the very beginning of the text. Remember the peacocks that are in the jungle of psychic existence that are representative of the bodhisattvas who are there. And again, in the jungle of psychic existence, we can see that the mind of self-grasping as well as self-cherishing, both of these run rampant in the jungle of samsara, brandishing the sharp weapon of actions, the karma that they create, and by virtue of that, we suffer. So this is the enemy that we want to be tormented by the knowledge mantra, the king of knowledge mantras, which is, again, the mind that cherishes others. So here's Geshe-la's commentary on those 3 lines. Self-cherishing itself is what is tormented. This enemy, through our listening to whatever it says, as though it were the orders of a great Lord, this is how we listen to the mind of self-cherishing, right? Like it's in charge, makes us run without even the slightest control in the abodes of the densely overgrown jungle of suffering psychic existence. The insidious demon of self-grasping, which is like that, again, it's similar in many ways, and it is the twin demon that's together with self-grasping, is the two that are the root of our own and others' room. So again, self-grasping and self-cherishing often are running rampant together through our suffering psychic existence. So again, it's not to say that every instance of one has an instance of the other, but they are usually combined together in the minds of ordinary beings. So, 1, the self-grasping that apprehends the self that is abandoned by the hearers and solitary realizers. They have to abandon that to achieve liberation. Of course, it is also abandoned by the bodhisattvas, but nonetheless, that self-grasping is what keeps beings in samsara, psychic existence, especially the cruel, insidious demon of self-cherishing, though. And as I said, for the bodhisattva, self-cherishing is one of the main enemies because we want to go to the extent of cherishing others to the greatest degree. And that becomes an obstacle. Those who are hearers and solitary realizers that overcome self-grasping, the first of these 2 that's mentioned there, will still have that subtle form of self-cherishing as I spoke of earlier. But it doesn't mean, again, they haven't gotten rid of the delusions, the afflictions. They instead just have this subtle form that isn't really an affliction. It's just a tendency that they've created through only being focused on their own welfare. And in the process of that, it's kept them from entering the Mahayana path. So the last line of verse 51, summon this pledge breaker who brings about my own and others' ruin. So you're asking Yamantaka to bring forward, to be annihilated and executed, our self-cherishing mind as well as the self-grasping. So not only does it bring about our own ruin through utterly demolishing us, Geshe-la says, due to being under its power, we also rarely enact others' welfare. So it's not only causing harm to us, it's causing us to neglect the welfare of others. Again, remember how we described that. I think it was in Thupten Jinpa's definition of self-cherishing that was in the original handout, that was the only handout really, but that first one that had some information on it. He says that it causes us to be oblivious to the welfare of others. When we're under the control of self-cherishing, it ruins our own happiness, messes with our own well-being, but it also causes us to mostly neglect the welfare of other beings. Although through pretending to do something, it may incidentally happen. Occasionally we do happen to break through that and enact the welfare of others here and there. But he says, through only thinking, may the excellent happen to me, we do not generally accomplish others' welfare properly at all, due to which it also brings about others' ruin. So it is the source of my own rune by virtue of causing that wheel of sharp weapons that I have to experience, but it also causes the rune of others because we don't engage in the welfare of others properly. Therefore, we say, summon that very enemy, kind of bring them forward to be again pummeled and executed and beat to death, whatever. I mean, again, pretty violent images that we're getting into in this section. The pledge breaker who is like that without letting them run wild, and no longer have them run wild, capture them, put them in one place. This pledge breaker, it causes us to break all of our pledges, our commitments, all of the things that we promise to others, what have you. We want that to come forward and Yamantaka to do his work on it. Okay. All right. So that's verse 51. Let's go to the slides I prepared for this. Oh, there's one little chart. This is a chart that I reproduced from Good Karma, page 218 of that book. Again, when we talk about the two truths, the 2 feet or the 2 legs kind of representing the 2 truths, that's the basis, conventional truths versus ultimate truths. Ultimate truths are all emptinesses. Conventional truths are all other existent phenomena. And again, everything that is an existent phenomenon that's a conventional truth has its own respective emptiness. So that's why it's plural. There's no singular ultimate truth that is this vast thing called emptiness that, is only of one entity. Rather, there is an emptiness with everything that exists conventionally. Well, the aspect of the path that you practice with regard to each of those is method with regard to conventional truths and wisdom with regard to ultimate truths. Again, the 2 wings of a bird that will get you to enlightenment. The principal enemy that is vanquished is self-centered attitude. I should say attitude, not attitude. I don't know how that crept in there either. And then self-grasping ignorance. So the self-centered attitude or self-cherishing is overcome by method, and then self-grasping ignorance by wisdom. What do we practice? Well, we practice developing renunciation, compassion, bodhicitta, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, patience, and so on. All of those sort of method elements of the path. And then for the other one, for that wisdom that's rooted in ultimate truth, of course, we meditate on emptiness. Merit is what you collect through all of those practices. Wisdom is what you collect through your meditation on emptiness. The resultant body of a Buddha that you gain by virtue of that in the sutra presentation is that you develop form bodies. The enjoyment body is a particular type of form body that is only teaching to bodhisattvas who've realized emptiness directly, Arya bodhisattvas. Emanation bodies are every other way that a Buddha appears to benefit sentient beings. Your merit that you develop through all those practices, overcoming your self-centered attitude and so on, that results in your conventional appearance to sentient beings to help them on their path. Whereas the wisdom wing of it that is developed by collecting wisdom through meditating on emptiness ripens into the truth body, the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya is the exalted mind of a Buddha that is omniscient and imbued with perfect compassion and so on, all these amazing qualities. So you have the Rupakaya, the form bodies, and the truth body, the Dharmakaya, that are the resultant states of this entire path. So what we have is the basis, the path that we practice, and then the results that we attain, and of course some other delineations of what goes on in there. All right. So you can take a look at that chart if you have that text, and she talks about a little bit more in there. Okay, so we have this verse that again starts off with, let me just recap all of this verse because we went through it line by line. It says, O king of the knowledge mantras that torment the enemy, summon, the cruel one, I'm sorry, I skipped over something. The cruel one, called the insidious demon of self-grasping, runs uncontrollably in the jungle of psychic existence, brandishing the sharp weapon of actions. Summon this pledge breaker who brings about my own and others' ruin. So, that's it. I didn't even put any additional commentary on that. I guess I felt like what Geshe-la said was sufficient. But verse 52, let's go ahead and take a look at that. I think we still have time for another verse or so. And then when we reconvene next week, we can carry on from where we left off here. There's another verse of summoning. It says, summon it, wrathful Yamantaka. strike it, pierce the heart of the enemy and the self. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin. To the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. Okay, so we're going to execute the executioner. We're going to execute the self. We're going to pierce the hearts of these two mistaken conceptions that have caused all of our problems and difficulties. Okay, so Geshe-la does break down the commentary in his text. We'll go through this, and again, I don't think it'll take really too long to cover this verse, and maybe there'll be time again for a question or two. So in the first line, he says, summon it is said 2 times in this context, just as we see strike it, rant and rave. That's actually the same word. It's just got 2 different translations. We have this double repetition going on here. Well, the first time you say it from the point of view of the conventional, the second from the point of view of the ultimate. Why? Because again, we have 2 demons that we're trying to, annihilate. That is, in order to be freed from self-cherishing by means of the 2 minds of enlightenment, the conventional and the ultimate, we say, wrathful Yamantaka, summon the enemy, self-cherishing here. Of course, we can also say again that it's both self-cherishing and self-grasping. There's no fault in that. It's just that self-cherishing, again, is the main enemy we're dealing with in this section of the text. So it too can be overcome to a large degree by both of those, though it is primarily overcome by conventional bodhicitta, which overcomes the self-cherishing thought that is blocking us from cherishing all beings. Then we have the repetition in the next line. Strike it is also said twice for a similar reason to the above. In the context of stating the enemy and the self, the enemy is taken to be self-cherishing and the self to be self-grasping. Since these 2, like a lord and servant, and again, they might switch roles on occasion. We saw them in a verse earlier where they were both set out. In that case, they were the messenger and the actual thing that is heralded by the messenger. But the idea is that they play different roles at different times. But in some case, they're like a lord and a servant. One is playing a more dominant role over the other. The other are like companions, like a lord and lady, that are there together as a couple. They're the same in giving us advice that brings about our ruin, whether they're telling you to believe in an inherently existent self or to hold the self to be most important and neglect others. So we say, pierce the hearts of these 2. So we'll see in the commentary that in the slides that gives a better description of what we mean by that whole idea of piercing the hearts. Then it says, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin. Again, the Tibetan for this is indicated as, where was it that I saw that? Anyway, it's right at the bottom here. In Tibetan, the same word chem is repeated twice, saying chem se chem. So it says chem se chem, which is translated here as rant and rave. Other translations have it as dance and trample or roar and thunder. It's just, again, getting at this idea of destroying, getting kind of abolishing, doing whatever you can to dance on top of the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to kind of find a way to get rid of it. So it says here, to rant and rave on the head of the bad conception, the self-cherishing, that, as was explained above, brings about our own and others' ruin, is to stomp angrily on it, whether it's ranting and raving or dancing and trampling or roaring and thundering. The reason for saying the 2, rant and rave, is also as above, because again, it technically is the same word, chem se chem. Then, whoops, went too far. The final line, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. So now the self is repeated, which has the same referent, self-grasping. But who's the executioner? The executioner is self-cherishing. So the enemy, the self of this line, is taken to be the enemy that is self-grasping, and the executioner is taken to be self-cherishing, which is like a sword-wielding executioner sent by the enemy. So again, there's different relationships between these, and it's not worth maybe thinking too hard about it because they change roles sometimes. Sometimes it's one sending the other, sometimes it's the other sending that one. In this case, again, it was the mind of self-grasping that is sending the executioner, which is the mind of self-cherishing. So to the hearts of these two, maraya, in other words, slay them through striking their heart-like vital point, the uncommon mode of apprehension of these two, the way that they are apprehending things in terms of self-cherishing, apprehending the I, the self, to be most important, self-grasping, apprehending the self to be inherently existent. Okay. Whoops, let me go to the slides, and I'll just cover again these. Maybe we'll start with this again just because it's kind of at the tail end of class. And so the very last line is the only one that I'm really going to comment on more because it has that whole idea of piercing the hearts, finding a way to annihilate them through the hearts. So the heart refers to, once more, the mode of apprehension of self-grasping, which is grasping the I, the self, to be inherently existent. Whereas the mode of apprehension of self-cherishing is grasping myself, I, to be most important, to tend to my needs first. So here, Geshe-la says, since we need to destroy both the self-cherishing and self-grasping and that they bring about our ruin, we say to Yamantaka, pierce their hearts. In this context, heart does not refer to a physical heart, but refers to their uncommon mode of apprehension, this being what needs to be destroyed. If our conception is grasping the self to be most important with the mind of self-cherishing, well, then we need to ruin, get at, destroying, piercing that false object, thinking that the self is most important. We need to replace it with the more valid mind of thinking all beings are important. We want to cherish others. And the same would go for piercing the heart of the mind of self-grasping, that has a false mode of seeing the self as inherently existent. So we need to pierce that, to destroy that. So then where it says pierce the hearts of the enemy, the self, the enemy, the self, in this particular context, once more, is taken to be self-grasping. That is the ignorance that apprehends the self and all phenomena to be inherently existent. The executioner is taken to be self-cherishing, which is likened to a sword-wielding executioner sent by the enemy, self-grasping, to kill us. So again, it's not to say that one is the cause for the other, but together with that self-grasping, self-cherishing manifests, which kills us. It causes our own ruin again, as well as others' ruin. But this is the executioner then. This is how it's positioned here, is that it's actually executing our well-being, getting rid of it, killing it. So we ask Yamantaka, Geshe-la says, to slay them both through striking their heart-like vital point, that is, their uncommon mode of apprehension. This is how we remove any false conception, is get rid of the object that it is adhering to, because that object is not a valid one and doesn't lead to good results. Just as the main or essential organ in human beings is the heart, because when it stops, we die, likewise, if the uncommon modes of apprehension of self-grasping, which holds to inherent existence, and self-cherishing, which thinks only of ourselves, stop, if those modes of apprehension stop, so too do self-grasping and self-cherishing stop. I mean, this is what we're essentially saying in all of our Buddhist path. If we get rid of the object that we are clinging to through our deluded states of mind or incorrect states of mind, we come to know the truth, then we supplant that. We get rid of that misconceived idea and we supplant it with a correctly conceived idea. All right, and then the final word, maraya. I didn't mention this in Geshe-la's commentary, but maraya is a Sanskrit word that literally means kill, or in another translation, it says to mortally strike at this, these two minds that are the enemies, the twin demons. Okay. All right, and I'll just point this out, that note that these last two lines, we won't see them for a few more verses yet because we're only at 52, but once we get to 55, we will see them recurring as a refrain of the last two lines of each of those verses from 55 through 90. Okay. All right, sorry, I went to this a little bit over with my lecture. I didn't check if there were questions in the chat box. Are there, who is Yamantaka's consort? There's two different versions of Yamantaka, just to get a little bit into that highest yoga tantra thing. The main one that is practiced by many people in the Geluk tradition is actually solitary hero, who doesn't have a consort. And then there is the one with a consort, and that one isn't practiced maybe quite as much in Geluk that I'm aware of. And the initiation for it is not given even as often, I don't believe. So that one I couldn't tell you. Maybe there's somebody who practices Yamantaka who could tell you, because maybe even in the solitary hero there is some invoking the consort of Yamantaka, but I don't know. I don't do Yamantaka practice. It's not been my main yidam or meditational deity, so I can't answer that. Um, and I'm glad Paimane could write Chem in Tibetan. You know what's weird, you were pointing this out earlier about Tibetan, is that you can have two words that sound identical, but they have different meanings there because they're spelled differently. There are different Tibetan letters that are in them. So they can have the exact same sound, but one is referring to a totally different concept. So you have a lot of tricky things with the Tibetan language. That's why it's easier to have the scriptural Tibetan, the words right in front of you, because then you can see, oh, that's got a prefix and that's got a suffix and this has a, anyway, it's interesting stuff. So, all right. Any questions, comments on tonight? I was pushing it a little bit to get a little bit further. I think we still have plenty of time to make it through the text. You're going to see that some of these verses tend to go a little more quickly, especially when we get into these refrain type things where every verse, two of the lines are identical. In the previous one, we had one line that was identical, but we had three lines to comment on. Now we're only going to have two lines more or less to comment on from verse 55 through 90. And so again, we do find that things pick up in some of that section. So I think we'll be fine with getting through the text. So if there are no questions, then let's go ahead and do our dedication prayers.